Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of what I hope will be many live streams on the Mandy Crypt page. Thank you all so much for making the switch from effing Chicago for this one. And just to kind of give a little I don't know, context as to why I'm doing this. I am gonna start moving my creepy, not Chicago centric stuff over here to my Mandy Crypt page. And then the effing Chicago page is gonna be just Chicago specific stuff. And I know that my little banner here says effing Chicago. I have had no time to change my banner. So that'll be coming soon enough. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming to hang out with me. And for those who are brand new, who have never seen me before, either on If in Chicago or are brand new to the Mandy Crypt page, welcome. My name is Mandy Crypt, and we are going to talk about a infamous type of poison. We are going to be talking about Aqua Tofana, otherwise known as Widowmaker, the Great Husband Killer, the poison of all poisons, or easier than a divorce, at least in the time that this came out. But to understand Aqua Tofana and why it was necessary to be used, we got to talk a little bit about what marriage was like in the 17th century in Italy, because that's where our story is going to be based in 17th century Italy. Now, life for women, we had very few choices back then, and the two biggest ones were either marriage and family life or the convent and becoming a nun. And neither one of these were super great options. There were some advantages to both depending on how your situation worked out. But a lot of times women were kind of forced into these situations without their consent. A lot of times marriage was more of like a real estate or a property contract versus a love match. And this is for a couple different reasons, and we'll get into that. And the same could be said for the church. A lot of times churches would not take girls unless they were like either teeny tiny infants or unless the family could afford to dower her to the church. Now, the way life was in 17th century Italy, marriage was for life. There were very few instances where a divorce would be granted, and therefore divorce was extremely rare. Spousal abuse was not a reason to be divorced, at least in the eyes of Italy's church and in the eyes of Italy's government at the time. And even those few rare cases where you do see a divorce happen, women suffered greatly during these. A lot of times they did not get custody or even visitation of their children. They would have to surrender any property that they came into the marriage with, even if it came from her own family. They'd often be socially shunned and things like that. This is a very heavy patriarchal society, and it was just kind of expected that your husband is probably going to be an ass to you, and he's probably going to abuse you at some point. Now, dowries were a requirement for a bride to be able to make a good match. And a dowry could consist of a large sum of money, land, property, or some combination of these things. And because dowries are large, essentially like bribes for a family to take their daughter, these are expensive funds to put aside. And it's one of the reasons why daughters were considered a financial burden and why families kind of bemoaned the fact that they would have a daughter. And it's also one of the reasons why, for a lot of families, if you were not in the wealthy class, you could probably only afford to dower one daughter. And if you had multiple daughters, that first daughter who would be getting married, if she made a really good match, she had a good dowry, it's probably the only one who's going to get a good match. Because if you couldn't afford to dower your daughter, her chances of having a shitty husband with bad employment opportunities, bad social connections, things like that, those chances go up. And again, this was just kind of expected for back in the day. And women were just kind of expected to endure it. Like, marriage was not often for people, or at least for women, something to be enjoyed. It was something to be endured. Now, women, when they come into these marriages, they're going to bring their dowry. They're going to bring things like a wedding chest with all their clothing and things like that. And also in 17th century Italy, it was expected for the groom to gift the bride a chest of gifts, including things like jewelry, clothing, or fabric, and things like that. And this is supposed to be like a welcome into the family. Here are some nice things, and we're going to spoil you a little bit. But those things were never considered part of her personal property. They would always be considered part of the husband's estate. So if they divorced, or she, for some reason ran out on the family, she would not be entitled to those things. And those would have to be forfeited back to the husband's family. So this means that marriage, not really something that a lot of people really enjoyed. And because of that, marriages were deeply unhappy for a lot of people. Now, that's not to say there weren't any happy marriages, because there were. I mean, they do exist. But because there was this expectation that your husband's probably going to be an ass to you, the fear amongst husbands that they would be poisoned because of their behavior was extremely high. And it's because there is no divorce that some women would resort to poisoning their husbands to get rid of a bad marriage. And not only would this be easily acquired, because poison's in literally everything back in the day, but a lot of times it would be easy to mask in terms of taste, texture, and things like that. And it could also be disguised as a very swiftly onset illness, because everybody got sick of those things back in the day, especially during times of plague or big epidemics. If you poisoned your husband at the right time, no one would ever know. So that brings us to Aqua Tofana and what exactly it is. And I'm actually going to make this image a little bigger so you guys can see it better. This is a more modern rendering of what they think Aqua Tofana would have looked like. Would have come in a nice glass jar, may have had a label on the front with a little illustration. Now, this poison, this liquid, was possibly named after one of the women who allegedly created Teofania de Adamo. And the exact composition is unknown, like the quantities and everything like that, and maybe additional ingredients. But we do know that the base ingredients, the main active ingredients, would have been lead, arsenic, and belladonna. And this poison was allegedly colorless, tasteless, would seemingly or seamlessly fit into any beverage or liquid, and be very easy to mask and go undetected. And these things would be often disguised in plain sight. So what we're seeing right here is a little devotional bottle, and on the label it's got a picture of Saint Nicholas, and the label on here says Mana de Saint Nicolo. And this is how allegedly the poison would have been disguised. It would have been disguised as manna or oil of St. Nicholas or St. Nicola. And this would have been something that was kind of innocuous to a lot of people. Might have sat in a cosmetics collection, might have sat in the family's, personal altar of devotional items and things like that. This very easily could hide in plain sight, and no one would be any the wiser. And it was said that this was used widely in Sicily, Rome, Palermo, Perugia, and Naples throughout the 17th century. This was a slow-acting poison, and it was meant to be given in multiple doses. So that way you could very easily play this off as if your husband had just gotten violently ill and was just not doing well and unlikely to survive. The first dose would cause flu or cold-like symptoms. The second dose would exacerbate it. The third dose would induce vomiting, diarrhea, burning guts. And if this didn't kill him, the fourth dose would. The fourth dose would be fatal. They'd be out, and you're now out of a bad marriage. Now, it was also said that there was an antidote that could be administered with lemon and vinegar, but very few people took this option, because I feel like if you're going to go to this length to get rid of your spouse, it's probably not a salvageable marriage. So that's this poison, this thing that we're talking about. Now, we've got some people that kind of come into play here. I'm going to kind of go through some of our main characters, and then we'll get into how this comes to light, how this comes to be known to the public. So our first two women that we're going to talk about is Francesca Lasarda and then Teofania D'Adamo. They are said to be the original creators of this particular poison, and they were also the original sellers of Aqua Tofana. Teofania has also been said to be the mother or stepmother or even the mentor to Giulia Tofana Mangiardi, who a lot of people will associate with this particular poison because of what comes later. We don't really have any evidence that she was in any way related to her, but there is some evidence that she was in fact a mentor of Teofania. Juliana was. Now, Francesca and Teofania, they would be prosecuted for making and distributing poisons in Palermo, and they escaped capture for several years. And their story is going to be something that kind of creeps in and out of this tale. Now, Geronima Spana, who is the stepdaughter of Giulia Mangiardi, and the daughter of Niccolo Spano, she's really our main character here. Now, Geronima, she was born in Sicily in 1615, and initially her family was quite wealthy. Niccolo was a very successful galley merchant. He supplied long haul merchant vessels. But unfortunately, he would die when Geronimo was quite young. And so, out of necessity, Julia, her stepmother, would remarry to another wealthy man. His name was Cesare Ranchetti, and he had made his fortune through real estate investments. And he also came from a wealthy family. But like many men at the time, he didn't appreciate the wealth that he had gotten. He will be known as a spendthrift and a loose-moraled man who wasted the family fortune. And again, out of necessity, Julia ends up having to find work. Publicly, she says she's a matchmaker. She dabbles a little bit in astrology, but privately, she is making and selling poisons and other potions. Now, in 1629, Geronima marries out of necessity at the age of 14. Because, again, there's not a lot of avenues for young women. And if you are able to be married off, your family is going to take that opportunity because they see you as a burden. Now, all things considered, Geronima and Julia seem to have a very good relationship. And later on, Geronima would call her a very good woman, somebody that she admired. And Julia also had a pretty decent reputation as well. But it still, for young women, there weren't a lot of avenues. So she would get married because the family were still falling on hard financial times. And she would marry to a guy named Niccolo Chiazzi. And he was a grain speculator. So not like super high up, but at least gainful employment. But Niccolo, he's also a shit husband, extremely frivolous, and an adulterer. By 1640, their marriage is not salvageable, and they will separate. Again, divorce isn't a thing, and I guess she decided she wasn't going to poison him, but they do separate. By 1633, though, we're going to bring it back a little bit. 1633, Julia's mother or mentor, again, we're not sure what their connection is, but Julia's mentor, Teofania, and her partner, Francesca, they are finally caught when they are on the run, and they are executed for poisoning. They are drawn and quartered and then tortured horribly before they die. This undoubtedly would have had a great effect on Julia, which in turn would have had an effect on Geronima, which would lead to the kind of lengths she went to avoid detection. And she was pretty good at it for quite a long while. Now, as mentioned, 1640, without Geronimo's husband around, without Niccolo around, she needs to make her own way. She needs to support herself. So she begins marketing herself as an astrologer, a healer, a herbalist, just general like good woman, and she's a little bit of a white witch as far as we could go in the Renaissance era. She was very successful, and she was known as a astrologer of note. And she had a pretty hefty list of clients, ranging from the poorest working class all the way up to the aristocracy. And it said that part of her business would be to heal women from their bad marriages by selling them Aqua Tofana. Now, one of the ways that she was able to do this is she developed a relationship with a priest named Don Girolamo, and he would provide for her the most essential ingredient for this particular poison, which was arsenic. Now, a lot of places in Italy would refuse to sell women arsenic because people feared women poisoning their husbands with it. So they had to have a man come in and buy it. Now, Don Girolamo, he didn't seem to give a shit about what she's going to do with the arsenic, assuming he, got a little something for his time and his patronage. So she got her arsenic that way, and she was able to make her stuff on the sly without people really noticing. And things like lead and belladonna were pretty easily accessible in any kind of apothecary or herbalist shop. Now, she would gain a pretty quiet reputation of helping abused wives get rid of their husbands, get out of their bad marriages, and she had a very good public face. It was said she dressed well, she was highly respectable, she was intelligent, confident, pretty, and as I mentioned, she had wealthy clients too who would often send her carriages so that way she could go and meet with her clients privately in their own home without having them having to leave their estates. January 17th, 1851, Julia Mangiardi unfortunately dies, but she dies in her sleep. So she lived a good long life, and she evaded detection. And it's very possible, had Geronima not decided to get super enterprising, she could have gone the same way. But after Julia dies, Geronima takes on the business, expands her business, and she starts to hire other people to help her with her work. And I think this is really her downfall because, when you have too many cooks in the kitchen, stuff is bound to go wrong. And now I'm going to kind of give you a few names here and there because she definitely had help with this. But basically what she was hiring most of these women to do was to just get clients for her and sell her product. She tried to keep her hands as clean as possible, and all of her business was done by word of mouth. Now, 1855, Niccolo, her husband, he has to leave Rome. He has to flee because he's escaping creditors. And I think it says something about how people respected her because she wasn't really asked to pay his debts as far as I could tell. But he flees Rome and is never seen again, never heard from again. So I do wonder if he did actually leave Rome, or maybe she got rid of a problem that, was coming back to bite her in the ass. Now, some of the women that Geronima hired during this time, they were mentioned in court documents, and that's how we know their names and roughly what their role was. Starting with Giovina de Grandis, she was a laundress, and she was also Geronima's right-hand woman. She was one of her best friends, a highly trusted associate, and would help her make these poisons. Graziosa Farina, she was a saleswoman and a beggar, and it was said that she dressed horribly. She dressed as poorly as possible to avoid detection because nobody really looks at homeless people who are begging on the street. Same, then as it is now, people who are homeless are kind of invisible. So she was able to get away with selling for quite a while. And it said that she was a pretty good saleswoman. Laura Crispaldi, who was another saleswoman, she would also recruit people either to be saleswomen for Geronima or to become a client and to buy the product. Maria Spinola, she was an astrologer, a recruiter, and a friend of Geronima. or Jiranema, and she would use her very legitimate astrologer's business to feel out who might need some widowing, who might need a little reprieve from a shitty husband. And then the last one we'll mention is Cecilia Versalina, and she was a poisoning client, so she bought Aqua Tofana. There were a ton of other people named, but these are the main ones that I'll mention because they're the ones who got the harshest punishments later. Now, what comes next is known as the Spana prosecution or persecution. Now, the investigation goes into the accusations that there's a poisoner's ring. And the investigation is led by Lieutenant Governor Stefano Bracchi. He would track down potential sellers and customers, and he often used torture to extract confessions and information from people. This was very legal at the time, also kind of expected for the time to use such tactics. And it's also important to note, again, Giardina didn't advertise. She did everything by word of mouth. So he worked a while before he was able to find anybody to crack. Now, one client did attempt to poison her husband by putting Aqua Tofana in his soup. But then she immediately regretted it and tried to take the soup back from him. And when she finally confessed that she was going to poison him, but she didn't actually want to kill him, he beat the shit out of her and then dragged her to the local sheriff, the local police, and made her confess what she was about to do, where she got her stuff from, and anyone else that she knew personally with this poisoner's ring. This is really what kicked off the investigation. Now, this would also put them on the path of not just Giulia Tofana, but Giannima Spana. Now, around 40 people initially are interrogated, arrested, questioned, and imprisoned. A lot of these people, though, were of the higher class, of the upper class. So, of course, they're not tortured, they're not arrested. They are quietly and politely questioned in their homes, and they received much more lenient treatment than anybody of the lower classes. The list included not just people of the aristocracy, but crafters, vendors, clients, the salespeople, all different kinds of people. And this would lead to most people not actually being charged or punished, largely because of their status or because they didn't know enough to really warrant being punished in any way. However, eventually, Giovina de Grandes, she is followed as she's making a delivery, and she is arrested and heavily interrogated. And she will drop the name Giannima Spana. February 1st, she implicates several people, including her best friend and several co-workers and clients. And that means that they're going to come to her doorstep next. February 2nd, 1859, Giannima is arrested and taken to Tor di Nona, where she is interrogated by Lieutenant Stefano Bracchi. And she was very polite. She was somewhat cooperative with the authorities, but she refused to confess to anything or admit to anything. She would twist answers around, try to make things seem innocuous. She would only drop information that they already had, and she'd only name a few people that they already had. She never really gave anything actionable. But everybody else that they talked to, the path led to her. And they got to a point where for months, Giannima's in jail at Tor di Nona, which is what this picture is of. And they're bringing these people forward, her customers, her clients, her conspirators, and they're telling her, hey, jig is up. I've already said my piece. So you need to confess. And she refused to confess. And the reason is that without a confession, the courts could not legally pursue an execution punishment. They could take her to court and they could try her and convict her, but they couldn't execute her. And she was banking on that. She was banking on not getting executed. Um, but I don't know how she managed to crack, because it seemed like she had a pretty strong will. I don't know if they moved on to torture, or they did some other type of coercion. But on June 20th, 1659, she finally cracked. She confesses in a very long written confession, and at the end of it, she says, "I've given this liquid to more people than I've got hairs on my head." And this is going to seal her doom. On July 5th, 1659, Giannima Spana, Giovanna de Grandes, Maria Spinola, Graziosa Farina, and Laura Crispaldi are taken to Campo de Fiori, which is what this picture is of, and they are executed via hanging. Campo de Fiori was a huge marketplace, and it's actually still in existence. Originally a meadow that had kind of like the city grow up around it, and this was a very popular place for very public executions. So they were executed full in public, and on this same day, a woman named Teresa Versalina Benedetta, or sorry, backing up a little bit. So they're executed on July 5th, and then the next year, March 6th, 1660, Cecilia Versalina, who is the only client of this whole case to actually be punished, is also executed, likely via hanging. And on this same day, other people who were somehow brought into this situation are also punished but not executed. Teresa Versalina, who was Cecilia's daughter, the serving or the servant woman of the Versalina family, Benedetta Merlini, and then another woman, Cecilia Gentili, were all publicly flogged and then banished from Rome. There were other people who were very privately punished. Either they were told to leave Rome and given kind of like a date to exit, or they were placed under house arrest, or they were given like a little slap on the wrist and told, "Don't do it again." And there were a lot of people who received immunity for their testimony simply because they were rich fucks. So now it's hard to say how many people she actually poisoned or would have caused the poisoning of. There are lots of numbers given out, and some of it's probably inflated, some of it's not, but it's believed somewhere around 600 people were poisoned with Aqua Tofana, from its inception all the way up to 1659, when the women were finally caught. And since then, it's become kind of a legend. It's become kind of like a little boogeyman for shitty husbands everywhere. And it's also a very good case for why no fault divorce should exist. Because when people cannot get out of a bad marriage, they would rather be widows and widowers than stay in a shitty marriage. So my advice to you guys is to be nice to your spouse, or you might be eating some poisoned soup. But that is it for now. This one was kind of a quickie, but I kind of wanted to like jump in and start doing some streams, some talks on my page, so we can have some fun over here on the Mandy Crypt page. But for now, that is it about Aqua Tofana.